Hello, everybody. I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe from Sportsnet. Together, we are Kenny and Renny, and this is the Kenny and Renny post-game show after a Jets-Boston Bruins game. And I'm going to say this right off the bat here. I don't think the Jets played a bad game or anything like that. I do, however, think that the score wasn't really indicative of what the game was. I know Dave Lowry talked after the game, and we'll talk a little bit about what he had to say. And thought he liked a lot of what he saw from his team tonight. I think he's right in that assessment. Blake Wheeler, the captain of the team, said, they're one shot away from that being an entirely different game and a victory. I got to say, I think that was a pretty convincing Boston Bruins win. This, to me, reminds me of a number of the games that we've seen so far this season. I'd be interested in the record. I haven't crunched the numbers, but I'd be interested in the record that the Jets have against the teams that we look at and see as being true contenders. I mean, I know they lost once to Washington, twice to Washington. Once they at least get a point in overtime earlier on in this trip. I think we all remember what happened when they played Carolina. We see what happened when they played Colorado, 7-1 drubbing at the hands of that team. And they've yet to play the likes of, Tampa Bay and, of course, the Florida Panthers, an absolute juggernaut. The New York Rangers, another team I would kind of hold in that regard. And I just think this is another one of those games where you took a look at a team that I think is here when the Winnipeg Jets are here. Right? Winnipeg Jets came into this year thinking that they were going to be a contending team for the Stanley Cup. I think all the excuses were erased. And I would count this as another one of those games. Yeah, they only lost 3-2, but I count this as another one of those games where I feel they were outclassed by a superior opponent. That's my take on it. We'll get to the chat room and see what they have to say, but why not get to Kenny Wiebe, my main man here, and see if he agrees at all with what I have to say. We didn't talk about it before the show, so let's bring him in and start getting his take on this whole thing. Here comes Kenny Wiebe. Ken, my friend, it's great to see you. Great to be on the broadcast with you, and great to have the chat room rolling in here. Sandy says, hello, good afternoon from Savage. Then we're starting to get a lot of these comments, like from John Gagne here, or Gange. I'm not sure which it is. Sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong either way, but says he thinks this is a boring team right now. Marshall Patterson kind of echoing that sentiment, saying, is anyone else losing interest in this team? Or is it just me? So I think there's a lot of people who are kind of getting frustrated at this stage. We're starting to see, this trip here. I think the concern with it, and the concern that we're seeing from fans here, Ken, is that it follows up on, an inconsistent season. We had the coaching change. That was supposed to switch things up. We were starting to see earlier on with Dave Lowry's influence on this team. There seemed to be a little bit of a change. They came out fairly hot out of the gate, but it was hard to tell whether that was entirely Dave Lowry's impression on this team, or if maybe it was the Christmas break, or if maybe it was the fact that this team benefited from all the time they had off and the few games that they had in between. We can get to all that kind of stuff. But let's start off with my comments at the start of the show. I took a look at this game. What I saw was a team that the Boston Bruins were clearly the better team on this night. Connor Hellebuyck kept the Jets in this game for a long time. And in the end, what happens is the Jets are, they get a little bit of a push right at the very end of the game to make it look like, yes, if one of those shots go in, it's a tie game. You never know what's going to happen after that. But I don't think that the Boston Bruins ever looked panicked with that lead the entire time. They looked to me like a team that confidently had this game in hand. Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, Sean, I would say that this was another great example of something we've talked about a lot so far this year. The Jets' inability to get that game to 2-0 was absolutely absolutely critical again, right? I mean, DJ, I may surprise you, so but I appreciate your thoughts on the take before I start dropping wake ups all over the place. But this is the thing, Sean. You said, I mean, again, Dave Lowry wasn't willing to go there, and you can understand why. But Tuukka Rask was shaky, and the Jets let him off the hook. That's how I view this game. I mean, I don't think the Jets played a poor first period. They played an incredibly strong first period. They barely gave up anything, except for a kind of bouncy rebound that landed on the stick of Oscar Steen. But the Jets' inability to get that to 2-0. They had a shift with Dubois, Connor, and Perfetti where they had 3 or 4 grade A scoring chances, were unable to convert, and then all of a sudden it's a 1-0 game. Now, you have to give the Jets credit. They still found a way to get it to 2-1, but then they came out flat in the second. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. Jets were flat in the second period. I thought their puck management at times was a bit of a issue for them. I didn't like Dylan DeMello kind of rifling it blindly on the first goal along the boards. I didn't like the drop pass by Dominic Toninato on the second goal. He was in the neutral zone. You got to get that moving north. I mean, I understand the Jets had an opportunity to maybe clear it, and some other folks thought it was maybe Nate Schmidt or somebody else. I mean, there was plenty. It just that play doesn't need to go into the defensive zone there. It was a neutral zone play, and then too, Sean. I mean, same thing we said after the other game. Jets power play let them down. There's no other way to say that. Their the first 3 power plays generated 1 shot on goal. That's not nearly enough. And then you see Boston. What does Boston do in a tie game? One of the best scorers in the NHL buries a one-timer. I mean, you got to know that one-timer, that it's a play that the Jets aren't getting a lot of those looks right now. So the Jets need to prevent those plays from being available. But, I mean, I'm going to let you you've shared your insight with me. I mean, why don't you share your insight with the good folks of our chat room in terms of, I loved Pasternak's ability to get closer to the middle of the dot or between the middle of the dot and the hash marks. And that's something for me the Jets have not been doing well enough. They're too spread out. They're too close to the boards. And when their one-timers are happening, they're not coming from as good a shooting spot as what we saw Pasternak get to.
Okay, so let me couch this by saying this thought. I went back and started looking at the play from because you pointed out how close he was in on that shot compared to where Scheifele is shooting from, compared to where Connor is shooting from, Kyle Connor on the power play. So I watched it. The interesting part about it is you're right, he's in shooting closer, but where he is before the puck gets to him, he is closer to the net. And what he's doing by doing that is he's moving in and he's creating a presence close to the net. Now think of this. Just imagine this in your head. I know sometimes when we have these conversations and there's not like a board to chalk it down on, or if you're not watching the game in front of you, it may be hard to see this. But if we all think of the Jets power play, we think of Scheifele and in the past Wheeler and right now Connor kind of staying with their back, almost leaning against the boards. And they set up there. And there's a purpose for that. The purpose of that is if you shoot the puck and you miss the net and it rolls around, they're there to keep the puck from exiting the zone, and it allows them to keep pressure on, which is why you see the Jets are always so good at keeping the puck in and pressuring for that full 2 minutes. I think there's a question with us, Ken, and I think with a lot of people out there, what they do with that pressure and how often they get it to the net. But a different tack by Boston. Now think of Pasternak as being one of those guys. Instead of staying along the wall, he moves in towards the net. And as a defenseman or a defender, you have to respect that. But then as the puck comes free up to the top, he starts moving straight back towards the board, towards those areas that, Connor and Scheifele usually stay in, and puts on the brakes right as the puck arrives and takes the shot from there. So by doing that, he gets the separation from the defender, but is actually in closer to the net than the spot that we're seeing guys like Scheifele and Connor shoot from. And it's one thing that we've talked about on this podcast in at length in last year and this year, Ken, is the Jets don't have a very dynamic power play, do they? They like to pass it around. The dynamic element of their power play is their puck movement, and that's where they try and find their movement. But one thing we've talked about in the past, and always Tampa Bay is a really good example of this, the guys really do move and churn. It's that idea of churning that we heard,
Yep.
Paul Maurice was talking about, and Dave Lowry was talking about. Other teams churn on the power play, where the Jets really set up silos and move puck from silo to silo, waiting for that shot to open up and take that shot. So that was really interesting. I thought that, I thought that was interesting how the Bruins went out and kind of generated that third goal, or the third goal of the game. If we're talking about the difference in this game tonight, it's that one power play hit, one power play didn't. That power play hit, by generating that space the way you saw David Pastrnak do that, that's the difference in the game on the scoreboard. But for me, you touched on it right off the bat. I think this was the most crucial part of this game. Is Tuukka Rask is coming back from taking the first half of the season off, and he played a little bit down in Providence with the AHL Bruins, and then he's come up, and I think he got shell-shocked in his first game, didn't he?
No, he won his first game. He won his first game against Chicago, and then he got shell-shocked against Carolina. Second game, he gets
against Carolina, correct. So you're talking about a goaltender that is, one, potentially rusty, two, is coming off, showing that rust affects him, and three, starts the game off, as Gary Galley mentioned, our colleague on the broadcast, in a very shaky manner. And you would think there's blood in the water. It's time to get going. It's time to get in front of the net, to create havoc, to make his job as hard as possible and get pucks on the net. And then after 11 shots in the first period, the Jets just stopped putting the puck to the net for 2 whole periods. And to me, that is the massive, massive problem here. Is there needed to be an awareness of that goaltender, the vulnerability that he had, and taking care of him on this night. Blake Wheeler talked about it. He said there's no moral victories right now. They need points. So there's no, if this is how you need to beat the Boston Bruins on this night, if you need to just go to the net and take advantage of a goaltender that's not there yet, don't be too proud to do that. That's where you have to go to. The blood was in the water. The chum was sitting around the crease, and the Jets Sharks just stopped going there and started playing on the perimeter. The same problem that we've had from this team for so long. Now, we'll get into it later, Ken, and we'll give the Boston Bruins their due for making that happen. But I did not see a Jets team battling to get the puck to the front of the net and battling to get bodies to the front of the net. And to me, that was inexcusable on a night where Tuukka Rask started as slowly and as shakily as he did.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't go that far. I think that this was a great example of how far advanced the Bruins structure is defensively. I just think they're a lot tougher to penetrate those areas that you were talking about. I didn't see a lack of willingness to go to the areas. I saw the Jets be unable to penetrate. I didn't think their puck movement was strong enough, and the Bruins defend well. I mean, I would actually give the Jets quite a bit of credit early. I mean, Pagansky, and I certainly would not have expected Jansen Harkins to be dropping the gloves in that sort of a situation. The Jets did get involved physically out of the gate, but then things got so sleepy in the second period. I mean, yes, the Bruins obviously bounced back nicely in the second period. You can imagine Bruce Cassidy read them the riot act.
Yeah.
Or the leaders just said, hey, that period wasn't good enough for us. And you know what the Bruins did when they had a period that wasn't good enough? Well, they took it to the Jets quite handily. So for me, it's super interesting. I mean, obviously Pierre-Luc Dubois, big hit on Matt Grzelcyk early on in the game. Grzelcyk looked like he might be gone with a separated shoulder. He comes back.
Did you think that was a hit from behind?
I didn't. I thought he turned. I thought it was more shoulder to shoulder. It's the one that you talk about all the time, where the defenseman knows he's going to be hit, and he kind of goes to a situation.
Oh, totally.
Like, totally. I don't think... Now, again, was there a little bit of head contact? Yes. But I think that what's being missed in the real time, all the super slow-mo, Pierre-Luc Dubois already has his left arm in the back of Grzelcyk. So for me, the primary point of contact is not the head. It's not even close. And that's a play where it could have been a minor penalty, maybe. But to me, it was not a dirty play whatsoever. It was just bad luck and Grzelcyk putting himself in a bad position. Grzelcyk also the guy where Josh Morrissey got the suspension for a hit that was actually way more from behind in Winnipeg. But there too, Grzelcyk kind of put himself in a terrible spot. But I mean, Grzelcyk's having a great year, and I mean, he's one of the reasons our power play was so excellent. I think the other night he had 3 assists in the first period in that game against Washington that I was watching.
Mhm.
Bruins are a great team. I mean, no one's disputing that. But Sean, this is a couple things. I like the fact that Wheeler said no time for moral victories because it's a fact. The Jets can't have moral victories. They're nearing the midway point of the season. Earlier this week, they were 7th in points percentage. Now, guess what happened yesterday? The Dallas Stars moved past them in the standings.
Yeah.
So guess what? There's another team that has moved past them in actual points. The other part, I love the fact that Pierre-Luc Dubois said, yes, there is a sign, there's urgency, but there's also frustration. I love that Dubois was honest in saying, I want guys to be pissed off because so often in sports now, Sean, we've seen, not often you see in the Jets or any other locker room, you don't see that anger kind of spill out where the frustration, you could see that Pierre-Luc Dubois was in his body language visibly frustrated. And guess what?
Mhm.
Once you lose 3 games in a row, you should be pissed off. So good on him for sharing those feelings and saying it publicly. And Pierre-Luc Dubois was quite frank as well. He knows it's not going to be easy for the Jets in February. I mean, all we talked about was the chance for the Jets to become more of a well-oiled machine with all this practice time. Well, now they're about to start a heavy-duty load of games, or they're in the midst of it. They're about to, they'll play that 4th game of this road trip and 8 in a row away on Sunday afternoon against an excellent Pittsburgh Penguins team. There's not a lot of chance for the Jets to take a deep breath and say, ooh, this is another great example. You got to be precise for a full 60 minutes. The Jets weren't that today, and it was a one-shot game, and they lost by a goal.
I'll say this. They come into this and we want to dissect and we want to analyze. And we said, what did they do with all that time that they had off, right? And did they get their systems back in check? And, heading off to this trip, I'm so tempted to say, Ken, as I did kind of off the top of the show, that they walk into this trip and they're playing Washington first.
Yeah.
Great team. Nashville, a team that's been pushing and is extremely hard to play against. Boston Bruins, like you said, and we'll get into this more deeper into the show. That's a good team. That's a really good team that they played there. And then now they walk in and they play Pittsburgh Penguins, a team I think outclassed them earlier in the year. This year, this is a hard road trip. And I said it a little bit on the last podcast, and I wonder about it again. I've been taking a look at the Jets schedule, and the Jets schedule through until March is absolutely stacked with really, really good teams. And it reminds me of that Jets team that started so hot in the 2018-19 season and then got to the second half of the season, got to Christmas and kind of tailed off. And I remember the entire time you could, if you were bored enough to do it, you could go through my Twitter account and check the receipts. I said time and time again early in that season that the Jets were pulling out miracle victories against bad teams. And they were kind of coasting, and I kept saying they're not going to get away with this in the second half of the year, and they didn't. Now, everyone asks, what happened to the Jets? Did they fall apart? There was rumors about weird stuff happening in the dressing room and all that kind of stuff. I contend to this day that the Jets had an easy schedule to start the season, started getting used to that, thought that this is what competition was going to be like, especially since they'd been so good the year before, and kind of fell in love with their own hype, and then got a real wake-up call heading into the second half of the season, playing really good teams. Well, I think that the Jets are in a similar position right now. Like these losses that the Jets are having right now, I don't think they've looked terrible. Like they didn't get the start that they needed against Nashville, right? But they do win the second and third period of that game. But it was already, they fell asleep for a little bit, and that team stacked it up on them. They never got back into the game. How many times have the Jets done that to other teams? You sleep on the Jets in years past, and they'll get 3 or 4 goals, and then the game's over. They've got you, right? Well, you come in here tonight and you grind out, you get an early goal against a shaky goaltender. You can't hold it. You get ground out by another team. They beat you. Hey, Washington, they didn't play bad against Washington. They came back and tied that game. They earned themselves a point. This is the Jets. Like, to me, I don't look at this and I say, this is the Jets failing to play Jets hockey. To me, this is the Jets. Like this is the point I'm trying to get across. What we're watching right now, this is the Jets. They're a team that's going to have a hard time beating contenders because their record, this is one of those cases, I think, where their record is who these Jets are. We have seen enough from them that I've landed on the spot that I've stopped waiting for the miracle wake up that this team is suddenly going to turn it around and that Nick Ehlers is going to start playing at the very tippy top of his game. And same thing from Blake Wheeler, same thing from Mark Scheifele, same thing from Kyle Connor, same thing from Pierre-Luc Dubois. I'm not waiting for that anymore because I'm not sure that I see that happening. And going out and getting Dylan and Schmidt on the back end filled two holes that we knew we had. And I did say this at the beginning of the year. Do we really believe that this team went from last year being the 14th or 15th place team going into the playoffs, and you add Dylan and Schmidt, and that is the secret recipe to suddenly being the team that wins the Stanley Cup? I think we're waking up to the realization that the Winnipeg Jets are who we didn't think that they are. But what we're seeing from them is very similar to what we saw from them last year and the year before. Maybe we need to wake up to the realization that this is the Winnipeg Jets, that they stick around the middle, that they push to make the playoffs, that they've got the skill to pull out games and win games. But the ability for this team to be a consistent, grinding team like we saw from a team like Boston tonight maybe doesn't exist and hasn't existed since about 2018.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting concept. I mean, right now the Jets are clearly in the mushy middle, and they have work to do. I would contend the Jets are, significantly better on the back end, but it's not with, difference makers like Cale Makar. No, the Jets didn't bring in Cale Makar or Devin Taves to play on their top pairing. So for me, it's super interesting. And for Mr. Captain, I mean, questioning Nick Ehlers' competitive spirit is absolutely ridiculous. He got hurt by someone driving through his knee on what was a dirty play. Last year when he suffered the separated shoulder, it was on a hit. The guy dropped the gloves with Ryan Getzlaf. So to suggest he's not competitive is absolutely absurd and ridiculous. And the Jets are going to miss Nikolai Ehlers when he's going to miss at least 10 games in 24 days on the calendar moving to LTIR. So guess what? If you're missing one of your dynamic players, like you're saying, Sean, the Jets are going to need to play a little bit more of a physical game and get a little bit more involved. So lots of people in the chat room are asking about Austin Pagansky. Austin Pagansky, since he's come into the lineup, is banging bodies around and getting to the hard areas. So he's not the savior, but he's a guy you can put on the fourth line and roll out there, and he's going to give you a little bit of physical play and maybe a little bit of secondary scoring. The Jets have had, this is another classic example. So we've been talking nonstop about no secondary scoring. The Jets get a fourth line goal on a really good play. Yeah. Nice, great hustle by Dominic Toninato. And in one of the rare occurrences tonight, the Bruins defense over pursued the puck and Jansen Harkins left wide open, and then he sneaks a shot through to Karask. But then the fourth line, they take it away, they give it, and then they take it away by being scored on the other goal, where that play, as I mentioned, on Toninato, kind of turning it. Again, sometimes it's okay to turn the puck south. I just didn't like that puck management there for me. But hey, if the Jets aren't going to be as dynamic as they have been offensively, Sean, then they're going to have to be better defensively. But they haven't really been that this year either. I mean, what I would say, we always, some folks like to talk about analytics. Jets shooting percentage super low. I mean, does that mean that they don't have the finish, or does it mean they're bound to come back to the mean? I guess. I mean, right now the Jets are not playing a complete game often enough, and it's hurting them when they play some of the better teams. I mean, someone asked about Columbus. He said, at the time, Columbus looked like they were a decent team, and that night Elvis Merzlikins was exceptional. The Jets didn't play well. I never said that they played well in that game. What I did say, they ran into a really good goalie. The Bruins are not the Columbus Blue Jackets. The Bruins are legit. They're one of the teams hanging around in their division, even though I think they're still in a wild card based after today.
Well, I think they've got like
they might have even gone third.
Right? Winning percentage. If I look correctly, I think they're like a .650 winning percentage. That's not a borderline team. That's a really, really good team. Phenomenal.
And here's the thing for me, the way Boston continues to turn over players, right? So, Jake DeBrusk, Sean, you and I have talked about this privately, and I'm going to share it publicly. Jake DeBrusk is the kind of guy the Winnipeg Jets don't have enough of. I mean, to have a guy like Jake DeBrusk, big, strong guy with skill, on the third line. The Jets don't have that right now. So that is, I mean, this was your concern from the very beginning, Sean. Do the Jets have enough depth and kind of physicality and grit in those third and fourth lines to be able to grind through team when you're playing a big team like Nashville or you're playing a team like Boston that is hard to play against? The Bruins aren't the big bad Bruins like they were, in earlier in the decade. In the 2010 decade, but they still have exceptional skill, and they've got depth. They've got guys who come into the lineup, and they ease the transition. They lose players in free agency. Guys leave. They're traded. They just roll another guy in that some people have never heard of. They've got a great program in Providence, and they got guys come in, come up. And even too, like, look at Eric Holla. He was kind of not on the scrap heap, but you could have had him for almost free a couple years ago. He had to take a show me contract, and now he's playing on the second line on a very good team. So, for the Jets, they have to play better. Do it like you said it off the top. Anyone here is saying the Jets were terrible today or outclassed, by a large margin. That's simply not true. But their inability to get that game to 2-0 or beyond, and then their inability for the power play to deliver by slow puck movement, not enough shots, not getting enough traffic, that cost them the game in a lot of regards today. And Connor, let's go to the goalies right away here, Sean. I know, sorry, I like to have you toss it around. We know I asked Dave Lowry what his plan was. He said he wasn't ready to divulge. His unwillingness to divulge, do you think that has more to do with the fact that he is going to lean on Connor Hellebuyck, or that he's looking for the element of surprise, whether that be Mikhail Burden or Eric Comrie tomorrow?
I would be, to be honest with you, Ken, I would be blown away if it was anyone other than Connor Hellebuyck. It was funny. Gary Galley was talking about the way they lean on him and how Hellebuck's a workhorse, and he is. We know that, and we know that he doesn't mind playing back-to-backs. We also know, as a coach, you got to manage these things going ahead. But where we are at right now is just 4 games into a trip. He's playing a back-to-back, but how much rest has Connor Hellebuyck had before this? And you know what? If you're a new parent, or if you've ever been a new parent, you know that there's not as much rest being had back at home. But I would think if there was a time that you needed a win, it's right now, right? Like, I was looking at the standings, I'm thinking, if the Oilers win here tonight, then all of a sudden they're tied again with the Jets, and it's like a block of like the Oilers, Jets, and Canucks are all tied with the same amount of points. Now the Jets and Oilers would have 3 games in hand on the Canucks, but the Canucks are a team that took a bite out of the Florida Panthers last night, which is, absolutely unbelievable. I had thought that maybe that little surge that they had under Bruce Boudreau was going to disappear, because they went on that grind of a trip where you got to go play the Lightning, the Panthers, and then the Hurricanes, which is just murdering teams. Calgary fell to it as well. But they bounced back and then took a bite out of what, who I think is the best of all those teams. So who knows? Maybe they're ready to push and keep going and pushing forward. If they are, how soon is it going to be before that 3 games that the Jets have in hand entirely disappears, like we saw with the Dallas Stars? They'd put the Dallas Stars in the rearview mirror and got a little bit of room behind them, and now all of a sudden Dallas is 2 points up on them. Yeah, the Jets have a game in hand, but they're not fully behind them anymore. The Jets lose tomorrow, and then all of a sudden you're battling, having lost 4 straight games. Your confidence, who knows where it is heading into a really, really tough stretch. So it's a long way of saying, like, you need your stars to be your stars at times like this. And I don't think the Jets have a better star and a more important player than Connor Hellebuyck. So I think because he's not tired, because he's had a whole bunch of rest, because he's a goaltender who wants these kind of games and doesn't mind playing back-to-backs, so you don't have to worry about it playing on him psychologically, Kenny, would honestly be blown away if he was not playing tomorrow. I don't know that there would be any kind of surprise factor to putting those other 2 players in the net. Like, if you're holding off to say, surprise, Mikhail Burden's in net, that's going to give us a competitive advantage against the Pittsburgh Penguins. I don't think that's happening. I think that's just, he doesn't want to, get out and say something. He wants to make sure Hellebuyck is feeling good tomorrow, wants to see where he's at, doesn't want to make any promises that he can't come back to. But I don't know. I thought Hellebuck was great tonight. I think he gave the Jets a chance to stay in and at least get back into this game and win that thing. He's the guy. You know, we've been saying it in the past, and he did it once already earlier this year where Jets needed a win. It was that game against Calgary when they were coming off that drubbing at the hands of the Minnesota Wild. He went out and absolutely goalied them. It may be you're going to need that tomorrow night, and I don't think you can expect that to come from Comrie or Burden, but you can expect it to come from Connor Hellebuck. That's what this team needs right now.
Agreed, and I would say, I'm like you. I'll be shocked if Connor Hellebuck is not between the pipes unless he says something to Wade Flaherty and Dave Lowry that we're not expecting. We know Connor Hellebuck wants to play a lot, as you mentioned. The games have been spread out, but I do think that at some point he's not going to play the 5 remaining games before the All-Star break for me, Sean. I think he gets a one-day rest. Maybe that's the game on Tuesday against Florida. And hey, I get it. Are you setting up your backup to fail if that's the case? Maybe, but I mean, the Jets won't have much choice. They're going to have to play Eric Comrie in one of these games. I don't think you can afford to wait until the Philadelphia game at the end of this stretch. But at the same time, I mean, I'm expecting Connor Hellebuck to play, let's say 4 out of the last 5 before the break. I would expect the break to come against Florida on Tuesday. But again, we'll see what happens. I mean, we know that Eric Comrie has played both games against Vancouver already. Is it possible Dave Lowry waits until Thursday? Maybe, but I think he has to play tomorrow unless he's physically not feeling up to it, and I would be shocked if that's the case. He enjoys afternoon games. I thought he was very sharp today. And as you're right. I mean, the Jets' best chance is a goalie win against a team like Pittsburgh. Mm-hmm. Again, speaking of goaltending, I mean, and some of the things that have been happening in front of the goaltender, we've been asked a lot about the Jets' play in front of their own net. Dylan Samberg has been steady and solid in most of his games since rejoining the lineup, and I want to get into that other side of it, the competitive side of it, shortly. But for everyone who is ready to say he's ready to play in the top 4 for the rest of his career, Dylan Samberg made a rookie mistake today. It's a mistake that veterans also make, but what happened, he was in perfect position beside Charlie Coyle. He went to check his stick, but he didn't take his stick. So this is what's going to happen with young and inexperienced players. Yes, it also happens to veterans, but that's another example of learning on the job. Has it happened to Logan Stanley? Absolutely. Well, guess what happened today? Logan Stanley took a seat and Dylan Samberg played, which was Dave Lowry backing up his words with action.
Yep.
We've been talking about this a lot. Would they do it? Would they do it? Yes, they did it, and that sends a strong message to the group as a whole. And I'm not here to dump on Dylan Samberg. I thought he bounced back nicely. He made a lot of smart plays. He activated. We always talk about his defensive play, and that's what he's going to be, but his mobility, and he made a nice read offensively to join the rush. I think it was in the second period. And, his puck movement still, to me, has been pretty solid for a guy who's just getting his feet wet at the NHL level. I would continue to play Dylan Samberg. I would give Logan Stanley a little bit more of a break. I'll be curious to see if Dave Lowry wants to have a couple, are you going to insert some fresh legs tomorrow at the end of this long road trip? Or are you going to go with the guys that you feel have been playing pretty well? I mean, that's the other thing for me, but I think it was important for him to play Dylan Samberg over Logan Stanley. And I think Stanley will benefit from a little, it won't be practice time now, but I think a reset, it was the right thing to do with him. But I'm just here to say that you haven't seen the warts because there hasn't been a large body of work. There are going to be warts with all players. And I love the way that Dylan Samberg responded after, again, it's not a mistake because he made the right read. He just wasn't firm enough or hard enough on the stick.
You know what? I'm glad you picked that up. I wanted to kind of touch on that. And this is the one thing that, people wonder about the Jets and how they handle rookies. I would suggest Samberg's game tonight was a great example of that because Samberg, okay, let's go to the first period and he gets dangled by David Pastrnak, right? Looks bad. But if you go back and watch that shift, he recovers from that.
Yeah.
Goes down ice, jumps in on the play and creates a scoring opportunity going the other way. So what I love about that is he got dangled. For sure he got dangled, and that may be a little bit of a rookie mistake. I think he wasn't prepared for, he's probably never seen in his time playing the skill that with a guy like David Pastrnak has, with the ability to do something like that. So that's a bit of a wake up moment for him right there. But what I liked about it is he didn't allow that to shatter his confidence and
At
kind of
all.
fall apart. He picks up, goes down ice, jumps up into the play, activates, did all the right things. I loved how he finished that shift off. So I love that bounce back, right? The good with the bad. Young kids are going to make mistakes, but they're also going to show you what they can do. He did that, right? But you are, I've got mounds of respect for you. And this is just one of the reasons why you pointed that out. I know that it's Dylan DeMello who gives up that puck, but you're right. Charlie Coyle goes to the front of that. It's not even just his stick. Dylan Samberg is in position to kind of body him right out, and never mind his stick. He never gets to that spot if Samberg is watching. And you can see in the instant replay, Samberg's realization of where Charlie Coyle is in that moment comes a little bit too late for him to affect it. Charlie Coyle skates in front, gets a clean tip in, and it's a late tip, which means it's almost impossible for Connor Hellebuck to react to it. So that's problematic there, right? And so I would say this about Paul Maurice, and people would call me a Paul Maurice defender, and so be it. That's fine. But last year, I think Paul Maurice felt like things were tight enough throughout the year that he couldn't give up a lot of games to rookie mistakes. But this is what you're living with. And I see, there was a comment that was put up here before, and to a degree, I agree with that. Someone was saying, put the young guys into the lineup, let them make their mistakes. They'll be better off next year for it. That mindset, clearly, Kenny, being that people are thinking that the Jets need to give up on this season and start working towards the future. That's fine for people to have that attitude. I think it's too early, and I don't think you're going to find a room or a coach or a general manager who's as close to the playoffs as the Jets are right now who are going to say, yeah, let's wave the white flag and move on. That's not going to happen. But this is what you run into with a guy like Dylan Samberg, as good as he's been. You are going to find moments where he costs you, right? And I would extend that to Cole Perfetti. I mean, we know Cole Perfetti we've talked about his game. I thought he did a lot of good stuff here tonight, but Cole Perfetti has been quiet on the score sheet for some time now. Here's a guy who's on a line with Kyle Connor and Pierre-Luc Dubois. And we've said that. I think that line's been working. I go into the last show and I say, if that line keeps doing what it's doing, you got to leave him alone and let that try and figure it out. But at some point, we know that when Svechnikov was taken off that line, and again, different coach, but when he was taken off that line, one of the things cited was that he didn't have a ton of points. So at some point, you're in the top six. You're on with the highest scoring and second highest scoring players on your team. Eventually, it's going to have to happen. Like Cole Perfetti is going to have to start putting points on the board. So for me, that's the next thing I'm watching for. I'm not saying because he hasn't had points in a couple of games, strip him off that line. But to me, the watch is on now. This is a team that's losing. They've lost 3 straight games. They're second. They get depth scoring on a night like tonight, right? They get a good performance from their goaltender. They did not have enough offense to win this game tonight. And that line has been leading the way for the year on putting up points. So if you're Cole Perfetti, that's the next stage now. You got to start putting your name on that score sheet more often. That's what I think the expectation is going to be from the coaches.
Yeah, for sure. And again, there were a lot of smart plays made by Cole Perfetti here again tonight. And again, to reiterate, Dylan Samberg is helping the Jets on the ice. I like the way he's played. I'm just saying that it's natural that for anyone in that situation, there are going to be errors that happen. And they happen to veterans as well. But, there's no perfect players in the NHL, and mistakes are going to happen. And as you mentioned, Sean, it means the Jets are going to have to live with some mistakes, but I think in the long term, they are making their team better by playing some of these younger players. Cole Perfetti's done a nice job of finding his line mates, doing a nice job. I think the biggest thing for me, Sean, is that he hasn't been a liability defensively. And that's
exactly good point.
So again, no, his feet aren't at the NHL pace yet, but again, he's adapting to the pace and he's doing a nice job of it. I think the Jets are going to be more than willing to use that first year of his entry-level contract. I think that that decision gets easier with Nikolai Ehlers' injury and missing him long term. And just for that's a great hashtag and handle, by the way. What I would say that it doesn't necessarily mean the player moves off quickly, and it doesn't necessarily always save a team money. I think for a situation like Cole Perfetti, for him to use his first year this year doesn't mean he's necessarily going to be a year closer to leaving. And it doesn't mean he's a year closer to cashing in, because, Sean, this year Cole Perfetti's not going to be a 0.75 per game player or a point per game player. So his second contract is going to be dictated more by what happens in years 2 and 3. And if you have the entry-level year slide next year, when Cole Perfetti's going to be a regular, he's probably going to have more production as a rookie than he would this year as a rookie. And again, the Jets want him to be as productive as humanly possible. I'm not saying they're here to hold him back, but what I'm saying is his second and third contracts won't necessarily cost as much by using the year this year either. Whereas we always think it's kicking the can down the road a year, and you get to keep him until he's 26 or 27 instead of 25 or 26. But this is about having a player who's been able to contribute. But you're right. I mean, that's the whole thing. When you play in the top 6, you got to produce. Like, that's part of the job. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're 20 years old or 35 years old. Part of the job is production. I mean, we know that, the players know that, and the coaching staff knows that. So the Jets are in an interesting position on a lot of levels, and that's one of them. But for me, I don't think they're going to be leery or scared to use the year. I know we talked a lot when it came to Ville Heinola last year. Last year and this year are two totally different things. To me, burning a year in a 48-game season is way different than in a full season. Yes, the pandemic is a factor in terms of revenue being lost, but to me, it's a way different scenario between last year burning a guy's first year when it's only a condensed season, when the Jets were clearly a bubble team last year as well. This year, Cole Perfetti, as long as he continues to play at that level, by all means, use the year and see where it goes and see where he is by the end of the year.
I want to get into Blake Wheeler. Someone's asked about it, but someone was also asking for the headband. So let's try and cheer up the mood here. 3-game losing streak. Let's see if this can do something to break it. Time to bring in Sean's headband. Ken, before we get into Wheeler, I was taking some guff earlier in the show for having poofy hair from the chat room. And the last couple times we've been out, people have been
shoveling your driveway, Sean. You had to have had a toque on, right? You had to have a toque on?
I was outside shoveling the trampoline with the kids right before I came in here. But I was going to say this, because people have been bugging me about the beard. And I got to say, usually beards make people look tougher. And so every once in a while I start growing a beard thinking that's going to happen. And I always end up looking like those dudes from Color Me Bad, that terrible band in the early 90s. Go look it up if you don't remember. I was going to try and bring a PDF into the show. I couldn't find it, but I'm not sure this works for me, the whole beard thing. I'm going to hold on to it a little bit longer. But the headband is always able to hide a little bit of the puffiness. Let's get into Wheeler and his return. Where did you see his game today, especially firing out of the gates with 8 minutes of the first period?
I thought he was moving his feet pretty well. Obviously, there's going to be a little bit of a transition period when any player goes that long between games, more than 6 weeks of time. I thought there were some glimpses of the chemistry between Mark Scheifele and Blake Wheeler that we've seen over the years. Did it result in, it resulted in one goal. I thought, it's obviously the puck goes in off of Andrew Kopp, but it let's just break that goal down in its entirety. Excellent zone entry by Andrew Kopp, using his speed to drive back the defender. Mark Scheifele, was it a break that he was looking for Wheeler, I think. It goes off of Kopp's skate, but Wheeler's ability to get to the net in his first period back, that showed you where his feet were at. His willingness to go to the net hard and get there, I think it was a good sign for the Jets. Blake was obviously very engaged physically, wasn't shying away from any contact. So I thought he did a lot of things well. What did he finish with? I don't know, in terms of a couple shots on net that I noticed. Overall, he finished with 2 shots on goal. So I would say that it's a good first step for Blake Wheeler. I think the Jets, it's quite apparent the Jets don't have to lean on Blake Wheeler to take care of all of the offense, but they're going to need him to be a factor offensively, especially with Ehlers out. I know there was some mild uproar on the old Twitter machine about Blake Wheeler moving immediately up onto the top line. I'm sorry, folks. I mean, actually, I'm not sorry. The Jets need Blake Wheeler. He didn't steal someone's spot who's been playing great on a line with Mark Scheifele. There was a vacancy, and he took it. And I mean, at some point, will he play some time with Adam Lowry? Maybe, but I have no issue with how much he was used, where he went, and I thought he did his part. I mean, how's it going to go tomorrow? Back to back, at this stage of the season after missing that much time. I mean, it's going to be a test. But I thought that Wheeler did a nice job in his return. What about yourself?
Well, I thought, he was. Let me gather my thoughts on this one. I mean, I think what you saw from him was him using his big body. I think he was trying to use his passing. He wasn't as fast as I think he got up to before he left. Like when we talk about, I think, what was it? He had 10 points in his last 5 games before he got injured. I thought that what we saw, especially when we got down to, that last road trip with Seattle and with Vancouver, he had reached a speed that we hadn't seen from him at that point during the season. I didn't see that speed there. So for me, it's almost like this is going to be a reset. Now what we can expect, if we're expecting that Blake Wheeler, you're probably waiting until the end of February for that Blake Wheeler to arrive, maybe even into early March. So I think that there's a little bit of a wait and see approach with that. But I did think it was interesting, to your point, Dave Lowry moving him to that top line. Like you said, some people were going to have questions about that, but he wasn't on the first power play, which I was honestly a little bit surprised about that they didn't move him right back there, because that power play is a power play that works entirely through Blake Wheeler. That's basically the whole plan of that power play, is to do that. But this is one thing I will take away from that. I was blown away that he was played for 8 minutes in that first period. And clearly from Dave Lowry's responses when we asked him about Blake Wheeler's return, this is the one thing that I was interested in seeing. We knew that under Paul Maurice, Blake Wheeler was going to be given every single opportunity to get his game going, to go out and play the most important minutes, to go out when the net was empty. We all know about his empty net points over the last number of years. We've heard about that. We all know about his ability to produce on the power play. We know that he's had troubles, in 5-on-5, or at least the results haven't necessarily been there. If people value metrics like plus minus, which I think less and less people are every year, he was atrocious at that last year. But throughout all of that, Paul Maurice was going to get him as much power play time as he could, as many opportunities with those empty nets as he possibly could. He was going to get those opportunities. I was interested to see how Dave Lowry was going to respond. And from Dave Lowry, from the way he talked about Blake Wheeler today, from the way that he employed him, I don't know that we should expect very much different of an approach to the utilization of Blake Wheeler under Dave Lowry than we did under Paul Maurice. And to me, that, I know it's early, it's a small sample size, but the early indicator to me is that we can expect the usage of him to be very similar to what we saw underneath Paul Maurice. What do you agree with that?
I just think it's I'm not disputing it, but what I would also say, it's also situational. I mean, if Nikolai Ehlers is available for today's game, I do think Blake Wheeler starts on the third line with Adam Lowry and is eased in the same way he was when he came back after missing 5 games of COVID. So to me, I think it's partly situational. I don't think it's a guarantee that he's going to play 25 minutes or 22 minutes a night. But on the nights where he's goaling, obviously Dave Lowry's going to lean on him if he's playing at that level. But again, for all the folks that are saying, "Oh well, Dave Lowry's giving Adam, his son, too much ice time," well, guess what? Tonight Adam Lowry played 12 minutes and change. So this isn't a farce. What he's saying is accurate. I mean, you're looking at players. And guys earning ice time. I mean, I think that today was another example of Dave being very true to those words. And that's the thing. I mean, if you're going to say that, you players are, you put your players on notice, but players are watching to make sure that those things are true. And I know a lot of people up in arms. I mean, Adam Lowry, that was a penalty he didn't want to take. Sean, you and I have been in those situations on the forecheck. To me, this wasn't a reckless penalty. It was one where, the stick got caught between the guy's legs. You probably think that you could poke the puck. Coyle did go down quite easily, but at the same time, that's a penalty you can't take. I mean, Adam Lowry knows it, but to me, it wasn't a reckless or careless penalty. It was one coming from Hustle on the forecheck, but it also, he knows it's one that he can't take. So, you know what? His ice time went down a little bit. I think that sends a message to the entire team as well. For anyone questioning, obviously the parental aspect, to me, I think that's ridiculous. And there's another reinforcement of it there. That's my quick view on that topic.
You know what? I'm looking at the clock. I can't believe how much of the time's gone away here. We should get into Harkins and give him his due for his game. Just give me an idea of what you saw from him tonight.
Yeah, active early. I mean, like I said, I didn't. In some ways, I think it's good on him for getting involved physically and dropping the gloves. But to me, in a situation like that, I didn't see anything that would have precipitated needing to drop the gloves. And if you're at Jansen Harkins and you've been used mostly on the fourth line and you've already scored a goal in the first period, I don't want to spend 5 minutes and then whatever time there is after the whistle in the penalty box unless A, you're defending a teammate, or B, you have a score to settle with that particular player. You know what I mean, Sean? I mean, that's one of those nights where you're feeling it early, you get one. I think you want to force the coach to try to play you more rather than spend that time. But at the same time, good on him for dropping the mitts if he felt it was important and trying to get a spark. It's an afternoon game, all of those things. But to me, it took away a little bit of the momentum of his game, and after that, he had a couple of really good shifts, but the situation kind of changed and evolved. I think there were certainly some times where he got a reward coming out of power plays or penalty kill situations where he went out with the third line. But, I mean, I think that it was a situation where on a night when you're feeling it, you want to be on the ice as much as possible. So I think there was some risk involved in dropping the mitts in that situation. How about yourself?
Well, help me out with this one here, because I'd like to transition this and talk about Harkins, because I was wondering the same thing, and I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that kind of stalling him. But you are right. Harkins came flying out of the gate, and you noticed him every time he touched the puck.
Really
and then
skating well.
Stopped noticing him as the game went on. But towards the end of the game, I believe when Dave Lowry started moving the lines around, and there didn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason on it. It was almost like the next three guys up, let's just throw some guys out. But at one point, did we see Connor, Harkins, and Dubois out on the ice together?
Yeah, it might have been for a brief overlap or whatever.
Maybe it was a shift that Connor took with Lowry and Harkins. I'm not sure, but I thought maybe that Dave Lowry, because I'd asked him about that and what he was kind of trying to achieve with the line juggling, he went there. Yep. That was the truest form of the line blender I've ever seen before. Like, it just seemed to be, it wasn't like he flip-flopped two guys and went with those lines. It seemed like there was a new line coming out towards the end of the game there every single time until we ended up landing on the extra man situation where they got the goaltender out. But I don't know. I agree with you there. I wonder about Harkins, and I thought maybe earlier on, if Dave Lowry was trying to get something going, that you may have seen a Harkins for the fight, for the goal, for the kind of early forechecking he did in the engagement, maybe popped up the lineup like we saw from Vesalainen in the last game and given an opportunity. Like, I do. It's one of the things I've liked about Dave Lowry so far, that maybe we didn't see her tonight, and maybe you can't see it anymore, Ken, because maybe the upper echelon of this team is just too locked in when you add guys like Wheeler and Stastny back into the lineup. But I liked how he did that with Vesalainen in that last game. And the thing about it was Vesalainen, who you and I have talked about all year, and maybe I've probably been leaned on him a little harder than you have, but Vesalainen is the guy that I say has been given more opportunity than anyone else and has done less with it than anybody else. But in that moment, in that last game, he gets bumped up, and all of a sudden he, gets out on a shift. They score a goal on their first shift in the third period, and he's doing a good job out there with them. I was wondering if maybe there would have been an opportunity to do that with Harkins tonight, even if his game hadn't been going and it had tailed off, maybe a spark to try and get him back in to say, okay, let's see if we can go get you that Gordie Howe hat trick, right? Because if, teams get focused in on like helping the young guy out, do something like that. I know there's bigger things at play with the game, but it may allow, players to kind of shoot and strive for something or move the puck a little bit more to that player. I didn't see that tonight. I don't know. It's funny. I'll be honest, Ken, and maybe this is what we should end on. I'm baffled the way that the Jets offense is going at this stage, because again, on a night like tonight, they get a goal from the fourth line. That should kind of be enough. If you realize that your opposition is going to score 3 goals on this night and you get a goal from your fourth line and you have the scoring prowess that the Jets have, you're thinking, okay, I like our chances going into that game. The one thing that stands out to me is, Ken, I was thinking about, like, well, maybe the Jets need a little bit of puck luck, but you're talking about that goal that Andrew Kopp scores. Andrew Kopp doesn't know he scores that goal. It's a great attempt at a pass, and yes, this good things happen when you charge towards the net, but it doesn't mean that Andrew Kopp's goal, the second goal of the game, isn't a fortuitous bounce for the Winnipeg Jets. And then if we think about last game, is it Pierre-Luc Dubois who scores when he passes the puck in off a defender's skate and into the net? Like, the Jets are getting fortuitous goals, and they're still not scoring enough. Like, we haven't really touched on this, and maybe we should. And I think someone had asked us, where was this? Either I was on another podcast or something, but someone had asked a question. Maybe someone did from the chat room. What would you rather have, the Jets lock things down defensively or put up more goals? And I'd said, yeah, it was on our podcast. And I'd said, this is a team I think that is like built to score. So they're going to feel better scoring. I don't think this team is going to feel good just showing up every night to like plod out 1-0 wins. You need to be able to do that every once in a while. But this is a horse. This is a thoroughbred that needs to run. But where's the running with this team? Where has the offense gone? And if I'm sitting here and I'm picking my brain saying, oh, these teams aren't getting bounces, and then I'm like, what am I talking about? They are getting bounces and they're still not scoring. Where's the offense gone with this team, Ken?
Yeah, quick one, just to put a bow on the Harkins stuff. I mean, one thing I would counter, Sean, too. I mean, late in the game or in the third period, Andrew Kopp took a shift with Jansen Harkins and Christian Vesalainen, and so did Mark Scheifele. So instead of getting them the bump, what they did was put a more offensive player than Dominic Toninato out with the fourth line. So I would say you're still accomplishing some of those things that you're talking about in terms of giving them a little bit of extra responsibility. In terms of the offense, it's super interesting. I don't have a great answer. Obviously, not having Nikolai Ehlers is a factor. I mean, he's one of the most dynamic, one of the more dynamic players in the NHL, but he hasn't been, putting in as many goals as we expected. I mean, the power play numbers are obviously dipped in terms of Ehlers' game before the injury as well. Mark Scheifele's numbers are down. Blake Wheeler had been out since December 10th and hadn't scored until December 10th. So, in terms of the rest of the players, I mean, what we heard earlier, we talked about this last game. The Jets are not getting as much offense from the back end, and their secondary scoring hasn't been there. I mean, Kyle Connor is still producing at an extremely high rate. I mean, Pierre-Luc Dubois' numbers are solid, but some guys are, and Andrew Kopp has had great numbers. I mean, for everything else that people are saying, Andrew Kopp, again, trending towards that 20-plus goal mark. I mean, Andrew Kopp's he's doing his part. So, but there are some other players that need to elevate their game. And that's a great point by Lynn. And for folks who didn't see it, it was just fantastic. I'm gonna post it on the chat room quickly, but I'm also gonna post it on my Twitter account for sure. Yeah, I mean, the offense needs to do more, Sean. I mean, the Jets we talk all the time about their high octane kind of team. Like I said earlier, their shooting percentage is down considerably, but that also means you got to find a way to do the job. You got to find a way to bear down a little bit more and convert those opportunities. And one of the ways in the past, Sean, we touched on it right from the beginning of the show. If the power play can pick things up for the group when they're not going, that's where you can kind of make some things up. And here's the other part. Like, I get it, and I'm the first one to say it. The Jets' power play cost them last game and this game. But if you look at the raw numbers, they've been operating at around a 25% rate under Dave Lowry. So their power play has actually improved to the level where it's up to 14th, which is kind of middle of the pack. But that still hasn't been enough to get the job done for them. Are the Jets going to be a lockdown defensive team? No, but they need to be better in terms of their defensive structure. And they need to do a better job. And that's where things start. If you're able to lock down things defensively, then you'll get your offense going. But it's interesting. I mean, in one breath, Sean, we're saying some nights that you want the Jets to be a little bit more open and run and gun, but at the same time, we're saying they can't rely on being a rush team, right? I mean, you know what I'm saying? So it's a tough situation. They're finding themselves in a situation where you're right now, we've talked about that word identity. Josh Morrissey used the term the other day. The Jets aren't sure what kind of team they are. The Boston Bruins, they know what the blueprint is. They play to that blueprint all the time. The Jets are not a lockdown team, but they're not a high octane team right now where you're putting up 5 or 6 a game either. So, we talked about mushy middle in the standings. Right now, the Jets are kind of still searching for what they're going to be or what is going to give them success. I think we have an idea of what's going to give them success, but they just haven't played at that level or that style enough times or with enough consistency, and that's why they find themselves in a position where they're up here, then they're down, and then some nights they look like they can hang with the real contenders, and then
Yeah.
other nights they're not at that level. So this is a humongous stretch for the Jets. These last 5 games before the All-Star break are massive for them. We know the schedule is hectic and busy. 7 and 11 is part of that stretch of the postponed games being made up. So they're going to have to get it together here before the break. Now they're 4-4-1 under Dave Lowry. There have been encouraging signs for the team, but they still need to be better in an awful lot of areas, and that's only going to happen with those players looking internally, because given their salary cap situation, a blockbuster deal, I don't see that as the solution. I think Kevin Cheveldayoff put his team on notice the day that Paul Maurice resigned. He said there's 2 ways to look at this. You're either going to accept where you are, accept your lot in life after having high expectations, or you're going to do something about it to get things turned around. And right now, the Jets are still in that process of trying to get things turned around. And in some ways, they've been spinning their wheels. In others, they've made some gradual improvements in their overall game, but they're not playing at a level where they will be considered among the elite teams. They're going to have to stack a lot of efforts together in order to get to that point, because right now they're a mushy middle team, and those are the facts.
Well, I'll say this. This will be my final point. You can jump on it afterwards if you want. You talked about the Jets on some nights looking like they can hang with the best teams in the league. I would say, unfortunately, that hasn't shown very often this year. To the point I was making before, I mean, they were outclassed by Colorado. They've lost twice to Minnesota. Yeah, they did take a win, and they were close with the Blues, but they've been, worked by the Penguins, worked, in my opinion, tonight by Boston, worked by the Carolina Hurricanes. The examples of them running with really good teams in this league, I think, are few and far between this year. And then to
Toronto
your
was a
point,
big one, though. I mean, it was on a back-to-back, but they smoked Toronto.
Toronto was one of 2 straight teams that went rolling into Minnesota, when Minnesota was playing at absolutely their peak of the season,
Yep.
and the Jets caught teams on back-to-back. Before this, I think the biggest example anyone had thought of was when the Jets beat the Oilers on that one day. Same thing, them on the tail end of a road trip. The Oilers clearly have shown that they've got problems, but here's my thought on the entire idea of, you said the Boston Bruins, they know exactly what kind of team they want to be, and the Jets are trying to find out what their blueprint is. I think that last year was a team that was searching for a blueprint as well. And I think that what they've been trying to do with this team for a long time now, the coaching staff anyway, is make this a team that goes hard to the net, grinds, gets those kind of goals, and adds that component in on top of already being like you'd said, that team that can score off the rush, that can be so dangerous. I wonder if we take a look at this and you say, this is the blueprint, this is what we want you to do, this is the game we want you to play. I'm getting to the point where if you've been trying to get your team to go to the front of the net and play grinding style of hockey now for a year, they've been asking this Jets team to do this, and you're never able to arrive there, and you're still trying to lock down that identity. Maybe the identity you're trying to ask them to play doesn't fit. Maybe you're asking a Corvette to climb the side of a mountain when you need an SUV to climb the side of that mountain. And I guess I would just put it like this. We talked for years, and clearly this was a more successful team even before they landed in the Stanley Cup Finals and winning 2 straight cups. But the Tampa Bay Lightning were that team that I think of like the Jets, that were just all offense, all high octane. That's how they wanted to play. And that the coaches said this team needs to play a different brand of hockey if we're going to go and we're going to win. Well, how did they achieve playing that different brand of hockey? They went out and they got the kind of players that could play that kind of hockey. They go and they get a Blake Coleman. They go and they get the big rig. They get a couple big defensemen that they can push around in the back there. They go and they get, and remind me who his name, Ken. He was with San Jose. They picked him up from San Jose, and he's in New York now.
Barclay Goodrow.
They went and they acquired those kind of players. And I'm starting to wonder, to your point, maybe it doesn't take a blockbuster, but maybe the problem with the Jets trying to get to the identity that they have been trying to get to is they don't have the personnel to get to that identity and play that kind of game. And maybe what we're seeing now is a team that is sitting and waiting for the right acquisitions, the right players to play in that mold, to do the kind of things that the coaches are wanting them to do, because maybe we're at a stage now we're asking Kyle Connor and Nick Ehlers and Mark Scheifele and Cole Perfetti and players like that to go and bang and crash in front of the net and tip and jam pucks in. Maybe those aren't the players to do it. Maybe that's the issue where we stand right now. Your thoughts on that before we close it down?
Yeah, I don't think the Jets are asking their players not to use their skill. They're just asking to use their skill within the structure. They're asking them
to add another element, but yeah, sorry, and I'm just going to jump back, and I'm not trying to shut you down. They're asking those players to add another element and be like Braden Point-esque, right? Because Braden Point can do both those things. But even with Braden Point on that team, they still couldn't get it done until they add those players that do that for a living. Barclay Goodrow does that for a living. Coleman does that for a living. They've gone to different teams and they still play those exact roles. And so I guess I'm saying, I'm not saying leave those guys alone and let them play on the perimeter and score. I think every player has to learn to play with an edge. But I wonder at this stage again, and I'll just say it one last time and then I won't cut you off. I'm sorry about that.
Don't be sorry.
The Jets have been trying to get to this identity for a year now. We've heard the same thing. They need to get to the front of the net. They need to score greasier goals. They need to be hard-nosed, and they can't get there. There has to be a reason. You've got an obvious goal that you're trying to get to, and this team is not able to get to it.
Yeah, see, I would also counter, they're not asking them not to score pretty goals. They just don't want them to be reliant on those goals, right? And I would even counter, I mean, the Andrew Kopp goal is from going to the net. It's not on the blue paint, but it's towards the blue paint, right? So I would even say today's goal, that first, the second goal today was an example of what the Jets are being asked to do, right? So I would also counter too, Sean. I mean, we've had this debate before. I mean, the Tampa Bay Lightning are still playing that way without that line. So, I mean, it has become it's not just the players. So those players were incredibly important in establishing that role, but they've been able to bring in Corey Perry and Matthew Joseph. So it wasn't just those players that playing that style of game. Again, it's not a direct parallel, but I'm just saying that line obviously had its role, but it hasn't been, they weren't just reliant on them. So the Jets aren't trying to be reliant on only scoring in the blue paint, but they want to add that element to their game. And I think under Dave Lowry, they have done a better job at doing that. But there are other parts of the game that have dropped off at times for the Jets, and their offense is one of them. So, but I don't think the Jets aren't being asked to dump and chase. They're not being asked not to make skilled plays, but they need to be more committed defensively. And that was still the case back, we're talking about 2017-18. Part of the reason the Jets made the conference final was because of their diligence in their own zone. They worked on it every single day in practice. They worked on it at morning skates, and not a lot of teams do that. So I think that there's a whole bunch of things that have to happen. They have to stay committed. I don't think that the Jets trying to be a run and I know you're not saying this, but going more, enhancing the skill set into the roster or lineup, it could have some benefits. But then we're back to saying the same thing we're talking about. Do you think that having more skilled players are going to be able to beat teams that grind you down, Sean, right? So that's the counter argument, right? So if you raise the risk profile, now you're making life more difficult on your goaltender and your defense. And I would even say that even though the Jets were probably the most committed to playing team defense in that 2017-18 season, I seem to recall in the memory bank that they gave up a lot of 2-on-1 rushes, a lot of odd man rushes, and Connor Hellebuyck sort of just erased a lot of those mistakes, even on the nights where maybe they weren't as diligent defensively. So, man, it's a tough spot for them. But, I mean, they need to do a better job on a lot of fronts. I don't think it's the bottom of the barrel by any stretch. I mean, did the Flyers lose today? I think it's 11 in a row. And again, I'm not saying the Jets should be holding themselves to a lower standard. the Edmonton Oilers are running at a 200 win percentage, and they have two of the best players in the NHL. The Philadelphia Flyers, I think, have lost 11 games in a row. So I don't think the Jets are at rock bottom by any stretch. I mean, they have to elevate so many areas of their game. That's true. But they just need to, this is a matter of just getting a few more things done. I don't think a complete overhaul is needed. But if this team falls off before the trade deadline, the Jets are going to be faced with a very difficult decision. We went very deep, Sean, about this last game, and that's why I wrote about it in my sportsit.ca column. And I will further expand. If the Jets fall off the cliff, then they're going to have to make some difficult decisions about their core group, whether that's in March or in the off season. But at some point, the core group, if it's not good enough, other teams' core groups are getting better. So if the current core group in Winnipeg is not able to get to that level where they expect to be or thought they were going to be able to get to, then there will be changes made. How deep those changes are and who is involved in them, those are also questions that are going to be answered over the next, whether it's 1 month, 6 months, whatever the case may be. But one thing we know, Sean, players are very aware of the situation that they're in, and they know if winning doesn't happen, there are going to be changes. So, we talked about the element of competition a lot. That usually brings out the best in players. Now it's about seeing how the Jets respond, and if they don't respond, things are going to be changing.
No doubt. No doubt. Great stuff, Ken. Let's get out of here quick because we know we're going to need this chat room to be fresh for tomorrow.
That's right.
They got to hydrate, get out there, hydrate, get their stretches in, maybe ride the bike for a little bit. It's going to be an early one tomorrow. Hopefully we can be seeing if, maybe it would be nice to be talking about a win, Ken. Let's be honest. These chat rooms, they're fun. People have been doing a great job, but they're lit up after a win, and there's a lot of positivity.
The intensity level's high.
Yeah, let's hope we're getting there. Other than that, just like Jet Oil Tom says here, hydration, everybody. Get your electrolytes in, and let's do this again tomorrow. Jets play at noon tomorrow, which means that we're probably going to be on roughly 3:40 or something like that. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday. We will see you tomorrow afternoon.